Well, hello there, everyone. As I promised on Monday, I said that I would go through one of the workflows to show you in more detail what I did, and also to give you a couple of pointers or some things that might just help you out if you're using Lightroom. So the photo I'm going to do is this one that Mike took of the Morgan three-wheeler. So I'm going to start off with this, do some of my processing in Lightroom, and then we'll move over to Photoshop later just to finish it off. So this is the photo. If we look at the histogram up here, we can see that it's quite dark. It's tending towards being a little bit underexposed. So what I'm going to do is we're going to sort out the exposure. We'll sharpen some of the bits of it. We'll maybe blur the background as well, and then we'll take it into Photoshop just to add a little bit more blur and to tidy up the tarmac in the road. So let's start off. I'm going to start off in camera calibration, and I'm going to try the different types of presets that come with Lightroom to see what works best. So I'm trying Camera Faithful. Yeah, that's about the same as it is as Adobe Standard. Landscape does a little bit. It just brightens it up and gives us a little more vivid colours. Neutral, yeah, makes it a bit dull again. Portrait, a little bit. And then Camera Standard, not a lot. So I'm going to go with Camera Landscape. It just sorts out a little bit more of the colours. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Lens Corrections, and we'll check Remove Chromatic Aberration and Enable Profile. When you enable Profile Corrections, Lightroom will attempt to identify the lens that you're using, and it will apply some corrections on there to get rid of things like barrel distortion and so forth. It doesn't always pick up the right lens, so sometimes you may have to drop down in here to choose the lens that you really should be using. The ones I've noticed has more problems with are the Tamron lenses. So the next thing I think I'm going to do is I'm going to crop this. I'm just going to the crop tool, and I'm going to do a freeform crop here, and I'm just going to try and move this around a little bit, just to attempt to move it onto the third, something like that. Maybe up, yeah, no, something like that, I think. So next we'll go into the basic module, basic panel, and we'll just sort out some of the exposure problems. Maybe we'll push up contrast a little bit. I'm going to pull back something in the shadows just a touch, and just pull down the highlights so we can get some detail back in the white paintwork on here. Next, we hold down the Shift key and double click on the word whites, and this will automatically set the white point. And we do the same thing for blacks, and that will automatically set the black point. This will just then bring a bit more contrast back into the photo. The next thing that I do is I'm going to push up clarity, and that's going to open up or increase the contrast of the midtones to somewhere around there. I think it's still looking a little bit flat, so I'm going to push up exposure a bit more, which means I need to pull down my highlights, and I suspect my whites are a little bit too high as well. Perhaps that might be a little bit too much on the exposure, so we'll just put it down to around a stop. There we go. Something like that. I'm going to push vibrance a little bit, and that'll just add a little bit more colour. And then I think the next thing I'm going to do is to do something about the background. To do that, I'm going to use a graduated filter. And if you hold down the Shift key when you drag it in from one of the sides, it will go parallel to that side. So again, if we do it again from the right, it comes in parallel to the right, and again from the bottom, and again from the right. I meant left earlier. But you can see when you hold down the shift key, the graduated filter comes in parallel to an edge. But this is an occasion where I don't really want this parallel to an edge, so I'm just going to move this down. We're going to swing it around a little bit. I'll get rid of the exposure because that's not what I want. What I want to do instead is to pull down sharpness. And let's just pull down this a little bit more. Now we can see where the red is on here when I move the mouse over the pin. Everywhere where that is red, I'm taking sharpness out of the image, and anything where there is no red tone, it's not being sharpened. And on here we can clearly see that we're actually impacting a little bit of the car and the driver's helmet. Now what's happening is everything above this top line here, because I pulled this in from the top, the -100 on sharpness is being applied. Everything below the bottom line, it's not being applied. And anything in the middle is a transition from being full -100 sharpness to full 0 sharpness. Now we can change the size of the transition just by moving the one of the top or bottom lines around. But what I want to do is obviously remove where we're taking sharpness out of the helmet. So I'm going to choose brush for this. Notice I'm using brush for the graduated filter and not the adjustment brush. So we choose brush, make sure that erase is highlighted, and now I'm just going to paint in here. Perhaps we'll go with a slightly smaller brush. Make sure that my flow is up to 100, and I'm just going to paint in here, just to get rid of the lack of sharpness around the driver and around the car. In fact, it might be a little bit easier to see if we go into full size. If I hold down the space bar, I can then move the photo around. So I'm just going to paint out anywhere that we've made things a little bit soft. We've got some noise in this and some colour noise as well. I notice we're going to fix that in a moment when I go to the sharpen panel, but I want to do this this graduated filter and just to sharpen up, or sorry, not sharpen up, but to blur the background. So I'm just going to make sure that we've got everything covered, and I just want to take some, make sure we've got nothing in there. That doesn't look too bad. So let's go back and we'll click on fit to bring it back to full size. So we've blurred the background a bit. I'd really like some more, so I'm going to right click on the pin and we'll choose duplicate, and that's going to duplicate that graduated filter. Now you can do this on any of the local adjustment tools, so the radial filter or the adjustment brush. You can always duplicate the effect that you've done. So it'll do a little bit more, so that's got that background a little bit out of focus. I'll do some more of that when we get into Photoshop. So I'm going to click on done. The next thing I'm going to do is take out some of these white lines. So I'm going to click on the spot removal tool, and I'm just going to paint around those white lines. If the brush doesn't choose a good match for the lines, then if you press the / key, that's the / key next to the right shift, you can get Lightroom to automatically resample where to take the matching from. So we'll just get rid of this one here, and then I'm going to get rid of this bit of tarmac here. I'm going to leave the corner because I know that the corner doesn't come out quite so well in Lightroom. and we'll leave that until we get into Photoshop. That's not too bad. I'm going to touch up this little area down here when we take it into Photoshop. So that's got that bit done. The next thing I want to do is I want to go into detail, and we'll do some sharpening. Now if we look up here, we can see that this is shot at ISO 800, which is why when I click in here we can see there's a degree of noise in the image. There's some color noise in it as well. If you can just see there's some magenta and green banding going on in the darker areas. So I'm going to do something to get rid of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to push up my sharpening. I'm going to push it up a reasonable way. Next thing we're going to do is to do detail. Just get a little bit of detail back. And I'm going to hold down the Alt key. And before I do that, I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and while we are just masking. What masking does is it masks out where the sharpening is happening. So if I hold down the Alt key on Windows and the Option key on the Mac, you can see the image goes white. As I move the slider to the right, we see areas of black appearing. Now anything which is white is having sharpening applied, and anything which is black is not. Now a lot of that white area is going to be noise and grain. We definitely don't want to be sharpening that. So I'm going to push this up quite a way to avoid sharpening stuff in the bodywork. If I release the Shift key, we then zoom in, we can see that we haven't got anywhere near as much noise now in the bodywork. If I now move up the color slider here, I'm just going to move it up until I can see some of that color disappear in the where we have that magenta and green. That unfortunately has an effect of bringing back some artifacts, as you can see around here, and we'll sort those out in a moment. The next thing I want to do is just to get rid of some of this luminance noise. So I'm going to push it up to around about there. That's not so bad. That's smoothed things out a little bit. Unfortunately, it's a compromise between sharpening and noise reduction. What noise reduction does is blur the image, and what sharpening does, of course, is to sharpen the image. It enhances the edges. And of course there are edges around the noise. So this is always going to be a compromise. And that's what I would suggest. Now I did say that I wanted to go back and do something about these artifacts around the helmet and around the windshield here. So let's go back and click on my my graduated filter. We'll click on the dot, and I'm going to click on brush and erase. Actually, I'm going to click on doesn't matter whether you do A or B. I'm just going to click on here because what I want to do is just bring a little bit back in that. Then we'll click back on erase again, and I'm just going to actually take some stuff out of here where we appear to have blurred more than I wanted. Now because we duplicated this, I need to move some of these out of the way. So we just grab the pin and we slide it up, and I'm now just going to paint back. In fact, what I'll do is I'm going to delete that graduated filter, we'll delete that one, and I'll apply those again. But what I really want to do is to make sure that I'm erasing the effects everywhere that I need to. If you make sure that auto mask is switched on, it'll attempt to do some edge correction. But because there's quite a lot of similarity in colour between the road and what's being reflected through here, it isn't always successful. So just be aware of that. Of course, you don't have to do sharpening in Lightroom. If you find it easier to do it in Photoshop, perfectly fine to do it there. So let's fit that, and then we'll right click on the button and we'll choose duplicate, and duplicate again, and there we go. We've just sharpened up the helmet a little bit. So I think as far as, oh, there's one other thing I'm going to do. I'm going to grab the radial filter, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make it look like we have a spotlight appearing on the car. Now, by default, with the radial filter, the sliders affect everything outside of the circle. And what we want to do is affect the inside of it. So to do that, I'm just going to click on Invert Mask. And now we can move the exposure up just a little bit. And that's just going to brighten the car and not the outside. And then the next thing I'm going to do is to go down to Effects, and I'm just going to put a small vignette on the photo just to darken the edges just a little. Doesn't need to be too obvious, it just wants to give help the eye focus on the car. So the next thing we're going to do from here is take this into Photoshop. Okay, so we've now got the image in Photoshop. The next thing I want to do is touch up this tarmac in the road to get rid of those lines, and then we'll put some motion blur to blur the background and some radial blur to do the wheels. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of this messy tarmac and to get rid of this white line at the back of the car. To do that, I'm going to use the patch tool. For this, I think the patch tool works fine. Of course, if you'd rather use the clone tool, then that should do a good job as well. Let's make sure we've got the patch tool selected. So what I'm going to do is just lasso around it, and we'll drag the patch tool off to somewhere else. Let's do the same thing over here. The key to using the patch tool effectively is to do this in small chunks. Let's see if we just can't get rid of that red that's in there. Might have to come back and touch that up with the clone tool. So you might need to do this several times on an area just to make sure that you get everything. But as I say, the secret to using this tool really is just to make sure that you do it in small chunks and choose a suitable area to patch what you're doing. Actually, that's not looking too bad, I don't think. Maybe we've got some artifacts in here. Let's just get rid of those. There we go. It's not looking bad, is it? So the next thing I want to do is to put some motion blur in here, because although we've softened the background, still like to see a little bit of motion in here. So to do this, I'm going to duplicate the background layer, and then on my new layer I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur, and choose, a value that's going to make that background look suitably soft. Something like that I think is actually going to look pretty good. So we'll say OK to that. Now, obviously what we've done is we've blurred the vehicle. So what we need to do is to mask out the areas that we don't want to see this motion blur. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a mask which hides everything. To do that, I hold down the Alt key and just click on the mask button down here. And that creates a black mask which is showing everything. And then we make sure that we've got the gradient tool selected, and I want to make sure that we have white as being the foreground color, because what I'm now going to do is I want to show the blurred background. So we'll just draw down with the line like that. So that's got the blurred background showing, but obviously we've also blurred the car, so I need to just paint out that area where the car is being blurred. So we choose a brush which has a nice feather to it. Make sure that black is the foreground colour, and we're just going to paint over the car where it looks like we might have blurred it. We don't have, thankfully in this photo we don't need to be too precise in the masking, because the background to the car is this uniform grey tarmac anyway, and so that actually will hide a lot of the areas that we actually miss. So make sure we've got a pretty good mask. There we go. So that's got that put back. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to do a radial mask for the wheels. So to do this I'm going to duplicate the background layer again, and on that background layer we're going to select the marquee tool, and what we need to do is we need to select the tyre and the wheel. So we're just going to draw that to make a quick selection of the wheel, and then we need to expand that selection to make sure that we get the tyre and to get rid of that road. And the quickest way to do this is to go to the select and transform selection. This will allow us to just stretch that out a bit and pull that up. Now we don't need to be 100% accurate with this, because we're going to end up masking out just for the wheel anyway. So having got that, we'll keep that selection, and then we go to edit and free transform, because what I need to do is get this wheel into its own layer, but I need it round so we can do the motion blur properly. So we'll select something like that. That looks fairly round to me. Do that, and then we go to select and mask, and make sure this goes onto new layer with a layer mask. Then let's hide these other layers so we can see what we're dealing with. We'll do select and reselect. Make sure that we're not on the mask, we're actually on the picture itself, and then we go to filter, blur, radial blur, and on this photo I think a value of about 20 looks about right. So we'll do that, and then we'll show the background layer again, and what we do here now is we'll go to edit, free transform, and we'll bring this back until it's roughly overlaying the where the wheel was before. We select that, and then we go for our brush, and now we're just going to hide the area that we don't want masked out. So we zoom in, let's choose a smaller brush. Now I've obviously not been completely accurate with my selection here. Do you know what I've done? I've painted over the wheel. Right, make sure the mask is selected, and we're just going to paint over the wheel just to bring the motion blur back. And let's just come down, and obviously where we've blurred the bodywork, we'll just make sure that we paint in the bodywork from the original image. Oops. as I said earlier, we don't need to be 100% accurate, but we do need to make sure that we do get rid of all of the bits that do look wrong. So let's just zoom out, and that. Okay, so that's got one wheel done, and the next thing we need to do is we need to do the same thing to the other wheel. So let's hide all of these layers again and make sure that we've got the duplicated background copy that's not masked, and make sure we have the marquee selection tool highlighted, and then we just draw mask around here, or draw a line around there I should say. Let's transform that selection to make sure we get more of the wheel like that. Let's go to edit, free transform. Again, I'm going to make this a circle or close to a circle, something like that. Select and mask, put this into a new layer with a layer mask. Make sure the image is selected because we're going to do a reselect, and then we'll do filter, blur, radial blur using the same values as last time, and then we'll highlight, open up the background layer again, and this time we'll go back in, we do a free transform. It's important you make sure that you're on the layer that has a mask for the wheel, because what we'll do is we're just going to pull this back like so, and then we go back to using the brush and we just mask out the parts that should still be sharp. So obviously we've got some pipe work and some metal shafts here that attach the wheel to the car, so we need to make those sharp. Oops. Make sure we're on the mask, that's most important. And we're just going to paint these back in again. Because these bits should still be sharp. They are, after all, they're not rotating anywhere. So let's just hide that to see what it should look like. Okay, so we need to do some more work up here. In there as well. And we've got some, see some tread there, so I need to just get the blur back in there so it doesn't look quite so obvious. Let's deselect that, and now let's show all of the other layers that we've got. And there you go, that's the car with some motion blur on the wheels. Now you might want to spend a little bit more time and get it a little bit more accurate than I've got it, but it shows you the principle of what you need to do, and that's what I'm trying to get over in here. So there you are. I hope you found this useful, and I'll speak to you again.